In the last video of this series, we have learned about Flexbox. This is one of two major systems to align things with HTML and CSS. And in this video, we are going to continue on that path and learn about the other system, namely Grid. And in case you don't know me, my name is Albert, and in this video series, I help our users get the most out of web development technologies to create better works with R, whether that is better data visualizations with ggplot, or nicer tables with GT, or better Shiny apps with, well, Shiny. All of these packages can be enhanced by knowing a little bit about HTML and CSS, and web dev technologies like this is what we learn in this series. So if you're interested in that, also make sure to check out the other videos of this series. And now let's dive in and talk about Grid. In the last video, we have seen how we can use Flexbox and making sure that things wrap around to the next row to create designs like this. Here inside of a gray canvas, this is what you can think of for our gray square. And inside of that canvas, we have 4 red squares. And we have seen last time that with Flexbox, we can move things around with that. But in this video, I will show you how to use Grid instead to make something that looks similar to what we have here, namely where things are aligned on a grid. And what we need to do for that is to first get rid of all the stuff that refers to Flexbox. This right now is still a Flexbox. So instead, let us now use a grid instead of a flex. And this doesn't really give us what we want because we have forgotten one crucial thing we need to set for the grid display, and that is the grid templates. You see, with grid template columns, we can specify how many columns we want to have and how wide they are supposed to be. In this case, we make 2 equally sized columns of 100 pixels each. And for the rows, we specify that we want to also use 2 rows which have equal height of 100 pixels. And that way, we get something that looks like this. And due to the fact that we have specified these templates now, we can also remove the individual width and heights because all of that will now be set with the grid that is in the parent container. So if you set it like this, nothing will change. And now that I see this, I realize that I still have this part in here. Inside of this video here, it doesn't change a thing, but if you look into the blog post for this video, then you will see that command, and this is just something so that my quartal theme doesn't interfere with the stuff that we do here. So don't worry about this for this video, just make sure that if you check out the blog post for this video, link for that is in the description, you will realize that these things with the container, so this with the style where all is set to initial, is just the thing to make sure that my blog theme doesn't mess with the HTML and CSS that we specify. In any case, we have now seen that our grid templates really determine how these things, the individual things that are inside of the grid, are sized and spaced out inside of the grid. And this is a really powerful concept because it allows us to modify the way the grid looks. You see, everything looks kind of squished into the top left corner of the gray square right now. And the reason for that is because we have used hard-coded widths for our template columns and template rows. But if we use something relative like fractional units, then we can make things look a little bit nicer. For example, we could use 1 FR and 2 FR. Here FR is a unit from CSS, which stands for fractional, and basically this just tells us how many units of the available space should we use. And since we stick this into columns, this will tell us that the first column will use 1/3 of the available horizontal space, and the next column will use 2/3 of the available horizontal space. And if we execute this, we will still see that the rows remain hard-coded just like we've had before, but our columns use different widths now. But we could also use the same units or the other way around. We could use 2 FR here and 1 FR there. And that way the first row will be much higher than the second row. And that's because we have given it the double amount of space compared to the second row. But right now this doesn't look particularly nice because all of the grid elements are very close to each other. So let's put in some space in between. And for that, there is the column gap argument, which will put in a gap between the columns. Here we use the gap of 10 pixels, and we can do the exact same thing for the row. And that way we also have some room between the rows. And if we also wanted to have some space around the grid, we can use something we have already learned in previous editions of this web series. Namely, we can just use a padding to move things further into the container. And here, let's just use a padding of 10 pixels. And that way we also have a small gap between the grid and the outside of the container. And if you want to go for some very elaborate design, you can also remove these 2 arguments. Do not use these grid templates column and row arguments. and instead use the grid template areas argument, and in there you can specify each row individually. And here we specified that we want to get 3 rows, and with using unique names like letters A, B, C, and D, we can specify where things are supposed to go inside of the grid. But this also requires that inside of the containers, we specify which one of these containers corresponds to A, B, C, and D. And the points here are just white space. So in the first container, we could put in a grid area as A. For the second one, we use B. For the third one, we use C. And for the last one, we use D. And that way, things align now according to the grid that we specified. So at the first row, we have one container that stretches the first 2/3 of that row. And the next row, we have 2 containers that are both using 1/3 of the first 2/3 of the row. And then finally, in the last row, we have a container that stretches the last 2/3 of that row. And that's exactly what you have here inside of our image. And in case you're wondering, why do we use dots for white space here? Really, you could use anything here. You could also use E. The point is, as long as the corresponding grid area E isn't defined, nothing will be put into that area. But it is common to use dot as a white space because this looks nicer if you look at this. Anyway, that's how you can make very elaborate designs using the grid template areas argument. And now to make things a bit more R-centered here, let me show you where you can use this kind of knowledge in R. So let me just scroll down here and make a new code chunk. And in case you're a fan of Shiny apps, don't worry if you haven't dealt with that before, we will come to that later in the series. But still, if you already know Shiny, then you probably also know the bslib package already, which is a nice package that allows you to insert nice looking elements into your Shiny app. And one particular thing that you can do with bslib is to use layout column wrap and insert cards into this. And that way, if you execute this, you will get cards, and if the surrounding container gets smaller, then things wrap around. So that's why there is this layout column wrap. And if you look into the documentation of this layout column wrap, you will see that width is set to 200 here, but you can also put it to some other number. But the thing is, right now only one width for all the columns is allowed. But it says here, if you know grid template columns like we do now, then you can do some cooler things. In fact, according to this documentation, we are considered power users now, so that's cool. So now we can use grid template columns to specify the widths of the columns inside of that layout. So let's insert style, and this will just set the style argument of this. And in there, it will set the CSS grid template columns thing to these 2 units. And this means, just like we've seen before, we'll get a 2-column layout where the second column is twice as large as the first one. And if you execute this, this is exactly what you see reflected here. And if you move things around, things will still wrap if things become too small, if the container becomes too small, but it tries more or less to stick to the stuff we have specified here. Okay, so that's cool. And now you have seen one more way of how you can use these CSS keywords and this web development knowledge to incorporate that into your R work. In this case, it would be something for a Shiny app. And with that, we have concluded our video today. And if you enjoyed this video, you might also enjoy the other videos from the web development series. Or if you want to see some other stuff too, like for example, nice data visualizations, then check out this playlist next, where I show you how to create very nice looking charts with ggplot. So thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.